Come with me to a magical place where being labeled the pork queen is a compliment, where being nice is just a way of life, and where all leaders of the free world must pass through. Welcome to Iowa. Whether you're a current Iowan, an Iowa expat, or an Iowan at heart, this show is for you. This is the Iowa Podcast. Real Iowans, real talk, no drama. I'm Justin Brady, and today I'm joined by Kaylee Williams, the investment director at the InnoVenture Iowa Fund. Kaylee, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me, Justin.
First of all, did I get the name right? It's the InnoVenture Iowa Fund. You've made up your own word, InnoVenture.
That's right. It's a combination of innovation and venture. And then we had to tack Iowa on the end, of course.
Yeah, you have to tack that on. But before we get into that, have you subscribed yet? No, you haven't? Why not? Like, what other podcast gives you all this unique information about Iowa that you didn't know about? Go ahead. Tell me. I'll wait. Yep, that's what I thought. I didn't hear anything. Nothing. That's why you should subscribe. Go to iowapodcast.com, and all your favorite podcast badges are right there up top. Hit subscribe on your favorite one. Okay, Kaylee, let's start here. It's a venture fund devoted to new startups in Iowa. We have a lot of questions around who cares, right? It's Iowa. Who cares about startups? Why should we care? You're the person, obviously, to talk to. But first, let's start here. What is this fund? Is there a good overview, a good way you communicate this to everybody?
Sure. I will give you the short one-sentence elevator pitch. We are a $30 million co-investment fund designed to support early-stage startup companies in biosciences, advanced manufacturing, and information technology.
That's really good.
Thank you.
Yes, you have to eat your own breakfast or eat your own oatmeal. Teaching all these startups to do pitches, you have to do it yourself and do the elevator pitch. It was really funny, by the way. Really quick side tangent. You obviously know I do communications for some tech companies and startups, and there was one company I was saying you really do have to nail like your vision and mission and like your messaging first. You really do have to. I know a lot of people say like, get your elevator pitch, and you think it's this cheesy part of being a startup, but it's absolutely vital. And here's why. And I gave this thing. And so one of the people in this little class I was leading actually did it. And he says, I kid you not, I was at a tech event and actually ended up on an elevator with an investor. And I went into my messaging and walked off the elevator with a business card. They ended up being an investor. I just thought that was absolutely hilarious. So congratulations for eating your own oatmeal.
Hey,
all right. So
kiss right there. That's great.
So what kind of startups are you watching in Iowa right now? And then we're going to get into how the fund works and all that stuff. But what's really exciting that you're seeing right now?
Well, it's interesting. My background is in SaaS. And so I've primarily interacted with and networked with startups that are building in ed tech, insure tech, fintech, all that information technology header. And what's been really interesting about this role is that I am now being exposed to startups in biosciences and the advanced manufacturing side. And we are seeing a ton of incredible innovations coming out of the universities, coming out of people's basements. We're seeing, ex-academics who have great ideas and they're ready to commercialize those ideas. And so there's a lot of really good activity happening. And these startups have tremendous potential to change the world.
Now, you're going into a lot of startups there that aren't ag-based. Like, I think a lot of Iowans assume that if we have startups here and tech startups, they're probably here because they're ag-focused. But is that not the case?
No, that's not the case. In fact, we're finding a lot of incredible startups. Like, I'll give you a few examples if that's all right, just to keep it interesting for everyone. So there's a company called Iota Motion, and they've developed a little device that can help doctors insert a cochlear device, a hearing aid, into the inner ear canal. And hearing loss is actually one of those things that's impacting generations at an increasing rate. As we wear headphones more often and we're on digital calls more often, we're listening to music, they're saying that Gen Z is going to have more incidences of hearing loss than any generation before them. And a lot of people don't get cochlear implants because the process of inserting the implant can be traumatic to the inner ear canal. Another company, Laminar Scientific, they've developed, for lack of a better word, these tiny little robots that float in the ocean and they generate hydroelectricity using the actual ocean waves. And they have a little bit of a solar component as well. And then a third one, there's a company called Steel Therapeutics that has developed really innovative ways to combine products and pharmaceuticals so that they're more easily applied into our everyday lives, which I think is fascinating. So it's really not just ag startups, although there are a number of exciting ag startups as well. But, Iowa has innovators across industries.
So why is a company that's collecting energy off ocean waves in Iowa? I can't, and don't get me wrong, I'm really glad they're here, but I can't imagine that much electricity is generated from Lake Panorama and Saylorville.
Well, that company in particular, it's a couple of academics, I believe from the University of Iowa, who study the transfer of energy. And so they've developed strong partnerships with companies on the coast and even over in Asia. So they're finding those strategic partnerships, but the innovation itself, the technology is coming out of the Midwest.
That's great. Okay, so how many, just to give people an idea of the volume, and I think we're still in, I don't know why, but I think maybe even me, maybe I'm guilty of this a little bit too. And I know you, right? And I'm kind of plugged into the tech scene. I think there's still this idea that there are 2 to 3 startups here doing this kind of stuff, and that's pretty much it. So over the past 3 months, how many startups have you met with, just to give people an idea?
I have met with over 60 startup companies in the last 3 months alone.
So over 60 in the last 3 months alone. What stage are they all at? Are they like pre-funding and they're just out of a garage? Are they funded? I mean, obviously it's unfair to give or to ask for a specific percentage breakdown, but can you give us a real broad guess?
Yeah, well, and that's actually the really exciting thing is that I would say 90% of them are early stage. I would probably a third are pre-revenue. I would say 2/3 of that 90% are post-revenue, but not much. They're still in that validation stage. They're not yet scaling actively. A few are scaling actively. That'd be that 10%. And these are companies that are raising money. So if you think about it, those 61 companies that I've met with in the last 3 months are just a sliver of the activity that's happening in our state. I'm not, this is all inbound. I'm not getting emails and calls from companies that aren't looking to raise capital, that are bootstrapping or building out of their basements, or, in that scale up stage where they know that InnoVenture Iowa isn't going to go in on a Series B or C or even D round. So they, why would they call me? So it's actually really exciting when you think about the fact that I'm probably seeing a minority of everything that's happening right now in the state.
Yeah, so 60 in the last 3 months in just Iowa, you're thinking is a small percentage of the actual startup activity going on here.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's kind of mind-bending. And now, is this all within you mentioned it earlier, like biotech, advanced manufacturing. Is this all within the wheelhouse, or there are some that are a little bit outside of that?
Yeah, there are a few that are outside of it. But that's okay. I like to tell founders, I'll take your call. I would love to learn about what you're doing. I think it's important for me to be aware of what's going on. And we just launched our fund. So a lot of founders don't necessarily know that they don't fit the bill. So, we get on the phone and I ask them a series of questions. We go through the checkboxes to see if they are a match for the investment thesis of InnoVenture Iowa. And if they're not, we let them know and, wish them the best of luck and try to connect them to resources as we're able. But, a few examples, companies that don't necessarily fit the bill but are exciting would be like Lola's Hot Sauce. It's probably not a company that we could invest in because it doesn't really fit the industry verticals that we want to go after. But great company here in Iowa with a ton of traction, expanding rapidly and raising a small round of capital to really scale up their growth in the years ahead.
So for the people not in tech and the people not in startup land, which is the majority of the state, what does a fund mean? You mentioned 30 million fund, and I like to go back to this kind of stuff because, I know what it means because a lot of my clients have gotten money off certain funds like this, right? But I think the average person doesn't know what that means. It's a $30 million fund. Where's that money go, and where did it come from, and what is like InnoVenture Iowa? Is that a nonprofit? Is it a private entity? Is there some company that set this up? Give us that kind of a rundown.
Sure. So I'll start at the beginning. A venture capital fund is a pot of money that a venture capitalist would strategically invest into startup companies. And what they're doing when they're investing is they're buying equity or ownership into those companies. And the long-term play is that the companies, let's just say you invest in 10 companies, 8 of those 10, the statistics tell us, will likely not return the money back to the fund. They'll either fail outright, or they'll just go on to either just break even, they'll return exactly the amount that the fund invested, or they'll just kind of hunky dory along, and they'll be like zombies, right? They'll never really die, but they'll never really grow.
Right.
And then we know that those 2 of those 10 will go on to have a meaningful exit event, and that could be going public, having an IPO, getting acquired, going through a merger. And ultimately, that liquidation event would trickle down to the investment fund, and it would replenish the fund. Now, typically, a venture capital fund is funded by what are called LPs, or limited partners, and those can be high net worth individuals, or for-profit businesses, or even colleges and universities and institutions like that. And typically, they come together and they all agree, okay, we're going to each write $1 million check. And that will create a $10 million fund, and then we'll hire a venture capitalist to invest that money into what they believe are going to be good investment opportunities to ultimately return that fund with a multiplier. So everyone puts in a little bit of cash, and at the end of the day, maybe in 5 to 10 years, hopefully everybody gets a lot more out of it than they put in.
Now, are they all also called angels? Because we hear about LPs and we hear about angels. Are those the same? This is, we won't get too far in the weeds in this for people who are like, I don't really care about that. But briefly, are they the same thing or different?
Briefly, they can be the same thing. So an LP can be an angel into a venture capital fund, but an angel isn't always an LP into a fund. So by definition, an angel investor is an accredited individual who makes individual investments into startup companies. So it's a person who would write a check here, write a check there, and then they're working directly with those startups. An LP into a fund is relying on the venture capitalist, the person who's managing that fund, to write those checks and to ultimately work with those portfolio companies and communicate back to them which ones are doing well and which ones not so much.
Right. So the fund then, it's still like a tongue twister for me, InnoVenture Iowa Fund. Yep. Now it gets kind of through Iowa Economic Development. Is that correct?
Yeah. So InnoVenture Iowa is a super unique fund, largely in part because we are not privately owned. We are a public venture capital fund. And that means that we do not have LPs in the traditional sense. The money is coming from the federal government through the U.S. Treasury. It was allocated to Iowa as a part of the American Rescue Plan Act. So if you think about it, this is like the people's fund. This fund belongs to Iowans. And that is why part of our charter is to only invest in Iowa startup companies. Now, that $30 million that we're getting from the government, once we've gotten, all 30 million of it, and it's being distributed to us through IEDA in tranches of 10 million at a time. So once we get that last $10 million tranche, that's it. The spigot is turned off, and it is ultimately up to us, the companies we invest in today, whether or not this fund lives on. And I like to tell people, if I do my job well, I will not be the first and last investment director of InnoVenture Iowa.
So in a way, that fund is essentially your seed capital or your investment round, and it's up to you to be able to invest it wisely so that basically this becomes a self-sustaining entity.
That's exactly right. We'd like to build what's called an evergreen fund, a fund that is a permanent positive fixture of the venture capital ecosystem here in our state.
That's super cool. So as an investor then, the state does not get any returns on this. That's not the point. Your fund would get the returns, so you can, I guess, could you possibly grow the fund to like a $200 million a year fund over the next 5 years or something?
Yes, we absolutely could, and that's the goal. So, $30 million is just the beginning. I'd like to turn it into at least $120 million fund in the next 20 years. And really, it's up to the entrepreneurs. It's up to the people that we invest in. So, and it's an important point what you just said, and I do want to go back to it, that the state of Iowa, not only, won't they have equity, but they can't. The state of Iowa cannot own equity. in startup companies. And so you asked me earlier what the structure of the fund is. We are an LLC, wholly owned and operated by a nonprofit called BioConnect Iowa. So I was hired by Steve Brody, who's the CEO of BioConnect Iowa, to manage and administer this fund. But we are our own entity, and when and if the startups we invest in today have a liquidity event in the future, that money flows right back into InnoVenture Iowa to be distributed once again to Iowa startup companies.
Earlier, you mentioned failure, and this is just one of those things that, I think startup land, we all embrace. New businesses fail. Everybody knows that. If you look at the internet, anywhere from like 70 to 95 or 97% of new businesses fail. So a critic may say, all right, we're going to invest all this money into a bunch of startups. That will fail. Why is that still a good investment? Or I guess I should ask, is that still a good investment?
It absolutely is. In fact, in my opinion, this is one of the best ways that Iowa could have allocated the funding that we received from the federal government as a part of the American Rescue Plan Act. In large part because while we do know that a majority of the companies we invest in will not return the money back to the fund, the ones who do will return it in a disproportionate manner, meaning we'll be able to return that 30 million and keep the fund going, but we can turn that 30 million into 60 million, into 100 million, or like you said, into 200 million. So there is unlimited upside to the state of Iowa and to Iowa entrepreneurs by having a public venture capital fund.
Basically, what you're telling me is economic gains come from this failure. And, one of the other things that's interesting about startups that, of course, I've worked for in the past is you see some people with interesting backgrounds in startups, right? You see people that normally would not have a tech role in another company. You see people from all sorts of different backgrounds. So does creating like a startup culture here and this fund, does that create some does that have a bizarre impact, I guess I should say, on the overall workforce?
Absolutely, it does. There are many ways to measure the success or the outcomes of a healthy entrepreneurial community. And one of those outcomes, of course, is the economic gains that can be realized by the companies that ultimately go on to have a meaningful exit event. But, when you look at it, at the companies that do fail, what they create for our community and our economy in the interim is, I think, very powerful. So think about, it's kind of everyone in BC talked about this, about how it's like a 5% conversion rate of companies that make it to each stage of funding. So, let's say you have 100 companies that are doing a seed round. The rule of thumb is that 5% of them will make it to their Series A.
Wow.
And then of the ones that make it to Series A, 5% of them will make it to Series B. So it really is everything's a funnel, right? And things are narrowing down and the field is narrowing as they go along and they grow. But in the interim, they're creating jobs. They're bringing in outside capital often into our state when they raise each of those rounds. And they are developing a culture of innovators. And they're often building these innovative solutions that are contributing to an economy that is vibrant and that is solution oriented. Startups really are, they're building the future of our world. And so even if a company fails, the research and the development that they put into whatever solution it was that they were building toward, well, that creates a foundation upon which another entrepreneur can build and ultimately succeed.
Yeah, that's it.
And I also,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, this might be what you were getting at, but I also think that the companies, I think that the people in our community who are really the pillars of success that we look up to, I believe that they are the products of their failures.
Yeah.
And that it is the founders who fail, who get up and try again. Those are the ones who are the most likely to ultimately be successful because they're learning and they're growing and they're resilient. And you don't just get good at this. No one is born good at entrepreneurship. Sure, there are traits you can have that will help you along the way, but at the end of the day, it is a learning process and it requires a growth mindset. And so the failures are required. They're necessary. We can't avoid that. And it's got to happen in order for us to have the Iowa success stories.
Yeah, there's this dumb myth out there that like just certain entrepreneurs that make it are just born brilliant and they just get it on the first try. And it's like, wow, that person was just, and we hold them up as this person did a startup and it was successful. Wow. But the reality is not that simple. The reality is the successful people, what you don't see is that they tried a bunch of stuff that didn't work. And basically the ultra successful, their life could be better summed up as a complete failure than a complete success. But the failure stories never make it in the newspapers. They never make it in the magazines, and no one really cares about those. Those are a blip usually when people retell the story. Like, I tried 2 companies and they failed, and then I made this. And it's like, hold up, like 90% of your life, well, you just skipped over in 2 seconds. And the 1% of your time in life that was the success is taking up the 95% of this pitch, you know? So when we diminish people's failure, when we diminish a failing community, we really diminish a successful one. And honestly, like, this is why I actually work with some startups early on. Just I go and talk to them. It's free. I give little PR comm sessions about how to grow their messaging. And I had some person say, you know, startups they're really not your wheelhouse because what you do is very involved and a lot of startups can't afford it. So why are you wasting your time? I'm like, I'm wasting my time. Well, I don't think it's a waste, but I'm wasting my time because I like educating others, but also because some of them will go on to be successful and they'll be great clients. Others will fail, which is good because they'll go to successful companies with the lessons they learned. So it's like a win-win for me. So to your point. So as we look into this like recession or inflation or whatever the heck we're calling it these days, does that negatively impact startups in Iowa? And does it kind of put some pressure on the fund? Or is there a silver lining to that?
Well, it certainly makes fundraising a bit more difficult. And I think any VC will tell you right now that valuations are going down. Founders are having a more difficult time closing rounds. And a lot of them are being advised to focus right now, to shift their focus to short-term profitability and sustainability. And I think that's probably good advice. Now, there is a silver lining. I think that recessions can be, I know it's a little converse probably to what you might logically think, but it can actually be a good time to build or start a company. You know, recessions create problems, and where there are problems, there are almost always startups. So they can move quickly, they can run lean sometimes, not always, but usually they can run lean, especially at the beginning. They can jump in and address today's problems in a way that the dinosaurs like Google and Meta and Amazon, they can't. Those are big, big companies with a lot of machinations. And while they are innovating in a lot of ways, and in fact, they have entire departments dedicated to innovation, nothing can really beat the agility of a couple of founders in a garage who see a problem and work to solve that problem.
Yeah, I used to think like the big companies, lots of resources, big teams, they're of course going to have the better product. And then as I got to know the startup culture a little bit more, I realized how wrong that is, because big teams and have big histories and have big bureaucracies that really stop people from being nimble and working on cool ideas. That's why a lot of these companies only grow by acquisition. They have to acquire these innovators doing cool stuff because they couldn't do it in-house. Like they're good at survival, but not. And then they also get kind of protectionist after they get out of that startup phase. They kind of keep their claws in certain areas. They don't want to innovate because they don't want to rock the boat. And that really hurts them. You mentioned some of the big players, and I think like one of them being, of course, Google. Maybe I'm going to eat my words on this, Kaylee, but I yesterday tweeted out, because Microsoft made that announcement about like their new Bing search engine. And, Bing is the butt of all jokes. But they're putting that like OpenAI, ChatGPT stuff that everyone's been seeing. They're basically putting that in their search engine. I already tried it out last night. It blew my freaking mind. I think this is going to completely change how search is done and how content strategy is done. Do we see a lot of AI kind of startups in Iowa? Are you seeing that? Of course, I think it's going to be impactful, but maybe some people are like, AI is a fad. So are you seeing that?
Yeah, we are. Absolutely, we are. We're seeing machine learning algorithms. We're seeing computer vision startups. I mean, RoboFlow is a great example of a company that raised a significant round of capital, and they are building in a space. They're essentially creating a vertical that doesn't exist. Computer vision is the future, and it's amazing actually to see the ways in which Iowa companies are adopting these new technology innovations and integrating them into their solutions. And not all of them are, and not all of them need to, but the ones that can are certainly going after it. And it's creating, so there's sort of a ripple effect too, because it's creating very high paying jobs. You can imagine, putting together a technology team and you've got one machine learning engineer on that team. Well, that's a pretty high paying job for a developer here in Iowa.
Yeah. So do these engineers stay here? Or do they do they come into the state, work there, and then they leave if the company closes or something? But are you telling me they stay here and they influence local jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the founders that I'm talking to see a competitive advantage to building and scaling in the state of Iowa, in large part because the low cost of living enables them to, they can actually allocate more of their capital towards building and scaling up their business and less of their capital in areas like, paying for an office in downtown LA, or helping to offset the cost of rent or moving or whatever they might need to do in order to make it work being out on the coast. And I think especially right now with inflation the way that it is, there are many benefits to building in the state of Iowa, but the low cost of living, the high quality of life, the well-educated populace that we have, and the talent pool, there's it's kind of a no-brainer. YC had their first class remote in 2020, Y Combinator. And so I am thinking of the RoboFlow team again, but they stayed here in Des Moines and they built here in Des Moines, and they were able to take the amount that they got from YC, and instead of using it to pay for short-term housing in the Valley, they used it to scale up their marketing efforts, and look where they are today.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you about how much of a trend that is. Real briefly, though, I wasn't sure if we get into this or not, but of course, I've worked with RoboFlow in the past as a client, and you actually worked there for a short period, so I just want to put that in there briefly. But you mentioned earlier valuations are kind of going down, and investors are getting a little bit more careful about where they pick or where they send their investment, where they put their money, right? So to that point, does that give Iowa a unique advantage because of that lower cost of living, because energy is so stinking cheap here, because dollars go further? Is that a thing? Are you seeing that happening?
Yes, I have had 2 companies now offer to relocate their headquarters in Iowa if we come in on their round and invest. And I think that says a lot about the value proposition that we have to offer here in our state and the context in which we're all living. The current economic climate is one where founders need to be scrappy and resourceful. And frankly, if there's one thing founders are good at, it's being scrappy and resourceful. And so they'll, if they see an opportunity and it's going to allow them to, improve their chances of making it to that next round, right? Everyone wants to be that 5% that makes it to the next round of funding or that next stage of growth. They're going to do it because these vision-oriented folks, there's not a lot that will stop them.
Yeah, it's truly amazing what's happening under our very nose in this state, right? And it's kind of mind-blowing. I went to the InnoVenture Challenge, which happened in December, right? It was December.
Yeah, early December, yeah.
So according to what I was reading, it attracted 100 participants. Can you, with just the couple minutes we have left, can you give us a look at what that challenge is, how people apply for it, and an overview of who came, as far as the startups?
Totally. Yeah, it was a success. We launched the very first InnoVenture Challenge last fall, and it is the state's first winner-take-all pitch competition. So we awarded one prize in the amount of $100,000, non-dilutive, to one startup company, and we had 3 finalists on the stage. But if you back up to when we first launched the application, we had nearly 100 applicants. And it was not an easy process. They had to fill out a pretty lengthy application. We had 10 judges who helped us narrow that field down to the top, I think 15 or maybe 18. And then I narrowed it down to the top 3. And then those 3 companies presented, and our investment committee ultimately awarded Hawkeye Surgical Lighting with the $100,000 non-dilutive prize. We've sold out the Temple Theater. It was a great turnout in the community. I think we had everyone from, law firms to accounting firms to the entire startup community, everyone who's been involved in the startup community and ecosystem here in Des Moines from the early days. And then we were able to bring in some people from outside Des Moines. And that was really important because, InnoVenture Iowa is a statewide initiative. We are not InnoVenture Des Moines or InnoVenture Ames. We want to be sure that we're being intentional about doing outreach and making sure we're getting in front of founders all over the state, even in rural parts of our state. So the challenge was, I think, a great signal for the future of our community, and we will be doing it again in 2023.
Yeah, and I was actually there, and it was like you said, it was sold out. It was packed, and it was so fun. I've done event organizing before, Kaylee, and there's always that period where you're like, are people going to show up to this, and am I going to be completely humiliated? And and that was absolutely not the case. It was super packed. It was really fun. And yeah, that winner, the Hawkeye Surgical, they just made this like little headlamp for surgeons and dentists or something, and you can speak to it and it'll like increase its intensity. And I was like, guys, this is dumb. It's a flashlight on your head. And then when they started talking, I was like, oh my word, this is a huge problem. So that was a super cool piece of tech. Kaylee, if future Iowa startups are listening to this, how do they reach out to you or possibly be a startup that gets investment from InnoVenture Iowa?
They can contact me directly via email or our website. So my email address is Kaylee, Kaylee, @innoventureiowa.com, or they can go to www.innoventureiowa.com to learn more about the fund, our investment thesis, the investment committee members themselves, and to use the Contact Us forum to tell us a little bit about their startup and why we should invest.
And I will put, obviously, the URL on the website. We won't put your email address on there so that it doesn't get scraped by all these spammers, but we'll definitely put the website on there. So if you're driving right now, don't worry. That'll be at iowapodcast.com. Kaylee Williams, Investment Director for InnoVenture Iowa Fund. See, it's still hard for me, Kaylee. Thank you so much for coming on the Iowa Podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Justin.
And to my fellow Iowans, Iowa expats, and Iowans at heart, thanks for listening and subscribing to the Iowa Podcast.